The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in September of 1882, and Caroline Devlin knew, before she even opened it, that her life was about to change forever. She stood in the parlor of her Boston home, fingers trembling as she unfolded the thin paper, her eyes scanning the sparse words that confirmed her worst fear. Her younger brother Thomas had vanished somewhere in New Mexico territory, last seen in a mining town called Montezuma near Las Vegas. The sender, a man named Marshall Webb, explained that Thomas had been working a claim in the nearby hills when he simply disappeared 3 weeks prior. His belongings remained untouched in his boarding house room, his horse still stabled at the local livery, but Thomas himself had vanished like smoke on the wind. Caroline pressed the telegram to her chest, her heart pounding. At 24 years old, she had been the one to raise Thomas after their parents died of fever when he was only 12. She had worked as a seamstress, taking in mending and alterations, making sure he had food and schooling. When he turned 18 2 years ago, he had been restless, eager to seek his fortune out west like so many other young men. She had understood his need to find his own path, even though watching him board that train had torn her heart in two. Now he was missing, possibly hurt or worse, and she was the only family he had left in this world. Within 3 days, Caroline had sold most of her possessions, packed 2 sturdy trunks with practical clothing and supplies, and purchased a train ticket west. Her neighbors thought her mad, a proper Boston lady traveling alone into wild territory, but Caroline had never been one to let propriety stand in the way of doing what was right. Thomas needed her, and she would move heaven and earth to find him. The journey took nearly a week, each mile carrying her further from everything she had ever known. The train rattled through changing landscapes, from the green hills of the east to the vast prairies of the middle states, and finally to the stark, beautiful desert country of New Mexico territory. Caroline pressed her face to the window, watching red mesas rise against impossibly blue skies, her anxiety mixing with reluctant wonder at the raw beauty of this strange land. She arrived in Las Vegas on a dusty afternoon in late September, the heat hitting her like a physical force as she stepped off the train. The town was larger than she had expected, bustling with miners, ranchers, cowboys, and merchants. Adobe buildings lined dirt streets where horses and wagons kicked up constant clouds of dust. The air smelled of sage, horse sweat, and something indefinable that she would later recognize as the scent of the desert itself. Caroline gathered her trunks and hired a wagon to take her to Montezuma, a smaller town about 6 miles northwest. The driver, an older Mexican man named Miguel, spoke little English but understood her destination. As they traveled, Caroline noticed the landscape growing more rugged, with hot springs steaming in the distance and rocky hills rising on either side of the road. Montezuma itself proved to be a rough mining settlement, smaller and wilder than Las Vegas. False-fronted buildings lined a single main street, including a general store, 2 saloons, a boarding house, a livery stable, and a small marshal's office. Men in dusty work clothes and cowboy gear moved about their business, and Caroline felt dozens of eyes on her as Miguel's wagon rolled to a stop in front of the boarding house. She paid Miguel and thanked him, then stood in the street with her trunks, suddenly aware of how utterly alone she was. But she had not come all this way to falter now. Straightening her shoulders, Caroline walked into the boarding house to secure a room and begin her search. The proprietress, a weathered woman named Mrs. Sullivan, gave her a skeptical look but showed her to a small but clean room on the 2nd floor. When Caroline asked about Thomas, Mrs. Sullivan's expression softened slightly. "I remember him," she said, her voice rough from years of tobacco. Quiet young man, polite, kept to himself mostly. Left here one morning headed for his claim and never came back. Marshall searched the area but found nothing. Where is his room? Caroline asked. His belongings, still here. Room 12, end of the hall. Marshall said to leave everything as it was in case it became evidence. Mrs. Sullivan paused, then added more gently, I am sorry, miss. We are all hoping for good news. Caroline spent the rest of that afternoon in Thomas's room, searching through his things for any clue that might explain his disappearance. His journal revealed that he had struck a promising vein of silver in his claim, and that he had been excited about his prospects. The last entry, dated 3 weeks ago, mentioned that he planned to bring samples into town to have them assayed. There was no indication of trouble, no hint of what might have happened. As the sun began to set, painting the hills gold and crimson, Caroline made her way to the marshal's office. Marshal Webb was a heavy-set man in his 50s with weary eyes that had seen too much trouble. He received her politely but had little new information to offer. Miss Devlin, I wish I had better news, he said, leaning back in his chair. We searched the area around your brother's claim thoroughly. No signs of a struggle, no body, no indication of where he might have gone. It is as if he simply walked off the face of the earth. Could he have been robbed? Caroline asked, her voice steady despite the fear curling in her stomach. Taken for whatever silver he had found. It is possible, Webb admitted. Though his samples never showed up for sale anywhere that I have heard. And usually, claim jumpers would either force a man to sign over his deed or make sure he could not report what happened. In either case, we would have found something. Then, what do you think happened to him? The marshal hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Miss Devlin, this is hard country. Men disappear out here for all sorts of reasons. Some run from debts or trouble. Some strike out for new territory on a whim. Some get lost in the hills and cannot find their way back. And yes, some meet with foul play. Without evidence, I cannot say which it was with your brother. Thomas would not simply leave, Caroline insisted. He would have written to me. He was responsible, Marshal. Something happened to him. I believe you, Webb said, and he sounded like he meant it. But I have limited resources and limited jurisdiction. I have done what I can. Caroline left the marshal's office feeling both frustrated and determined. If official channels could not help her, she would find another way. She would search the area herself, ask questions, follow any lead no matter how slim. She had not traveled 2,000 miles to give up at the first obstacle. That evening, she ate a simple supper in the boarding house dining room, aware of curious glances from the other guests, all men. She was just finishing her meal when Mrs. Sullivan approached her table. If you are serious about searching for your brother, you should talk to Parker Mason, the older woman said quietly. He is a local cowboy and guide, knows this country better than anyone. He has helped search for lost miners before. Good man, honest. You can usually find him at the livery or at the Silver Spur Saloon in the evenings. Caroline thanked her for the information and, despite her exhaustion, decided to seek out this Parker Mason immediately. She had no time to waste. The Silver Spur was exactly what she expected. A rough establishment with a long bar, card tables, and the smell of whiskey and tobacco smoke thick in the air. Conversation died when she pushed through the swinging doors, and every head turned to stare. Caroline ignored the attention, walking directly to the bartender. I am looking for Parker Mason, she said clearly. Is he here? The bartender, a thin man with a scarred face, jerked his head toward a corner table where 3 men sat playing cards. That would be Parker at the end there, the one in the blue shirt. Caroline crossed the room, her boots clicking on the wooden floor, As she approached the table, she got her first good look at Parker Mason. He appeared to be in his late 20s, with dark brown hair that needed cutting, several days' worth of beard stubble, and sharp hazel eyes that studied her with obvious curiosity. He wore dusty range clothes and a bandana tied loosely around his neck, and there was an easy confidence in the way he lounged in his chair that suggested a man comfortable in his own skin. "Mr. Mason?" she asked. He straightened slightly, setting down his cards. "That would be me. And you are?" "Caroline Devlin. My brother Thomas is missing, and I need someone who knows this territory to help me search for him. Mrs. Sullivan said you might be willing to guide me." Parker exchanged glances with the other men at the table, then rose to his feet with fluid grace. He was taller than she had expected, easily over 6 feet, and there was a quiet strength in his lean frame. "Let us talk outside where we can hear ourselves think," he suggested. They stepped out into the cool night air, and Caroline found herself grateful for the relative quiet after the noise of the saloon. Stars blazed overhead in impossible numbers, brighter than she had ever seen back east. Parker leaned against the hitching rail and regarded her seriously. "Thomas Devlin. I heard about him going missing. You came all the way from back east." "From Boston," Caroline confirmed. "He is my only family, Mr. Mason. The marshal has done what he can, but it was not enough. I need to keep searching, but I do not know this country. I need a guide, someone who can help me cover ground I could not manage alone. I can pay fairly for your time." Parker was quiet for a moment, studying her in the lamplight that spilled from the saloon windows. She met his gaze steadily, refusing to look away. "How old are you, Miss Devlin?" he asked finally. The question surprised her. 24. "Why does that matter?" "Because I need to know if you understand what you are asking. This is not civilized country. The terrain is rough, the sun is brutal, and there are a dozen ways to get yourself killed if you do not know what you are doing. I have seen tenderfoots from back east who thought they could handle Western conditions, and most of them learned hard lessons. I am not afraid of hard work, Mr. Mason. I raised my brother from the time he was 12 years old while supporting us both as a seamstress. I am stronger than I look, and I am not asking to be coddled. I just need someone who knows where to look and how to survive out here while we do it." Something shifted in Parker's expression, a hint of respect replacing the skepticism. "What makes you think your brother is still alive to be found?" The question hit her like a physical blow, but Caroline kept her voice steady. "I do not know that he is, but I do know that I have to try. If he is out there hurt or trapped somewhere, every day matters, and if he is not—" She paused, swallowing hard. "If he is not, I still need to know what happened to him. I need to bring him home one way or another." Parker nodded slowly. "All right, I respect that. I will help you, but we do this my way. You follow my instructions without argument, especially if things get dangerous. You wear practical clothes and boots that can handle rough ground, and you understand that I cannot make promises about what we will or will not find." "I understand," Caroline said, relief flooding through her. "When can we start?" "Tomorrow morning, first light. We will begin at his claim and work outward from there. Bring water, food for several days, extra clothes, and a bedroll. We may need to camp out if the search takes us far enough from town. Can you ride?" "I learned as a girl, though it has been some years." "We will get you a gentle horse from the livery. Meet me there at dawn." He pushed off from the hitching rail, then paused. "Miss Devlin, I am going to be honest with you. The odds of finding your brother alive after 3 weeks are not good. I do not want to give you false hope. I prefer honest odds to comfortable lies, Mr. Mason. I will see you at dawn." She walked back to the boarding house with her emotions in turmoil. Fear for Thomas warred with hope that Parker Mason would help her find answers, and beneath both was a strange flutter of something else she could not quite name. She told herself it was simply relief at finding help, nothing more. That night, Caroline lay in her narrow bed and prayed harder than she had prayed in years. She prayed that Thomas was alive, that she would find him, that God would guide their search and keep them safe. But sleep was a long time coming, and when it finally arrived, it brought dreams of endless desert hills and her brother's voice calling from somewhere she could not reach. Dawn came cold and clear, the sky turning from black to deep purple to pink and gold. Caroline dressed in her most practical outfit, a simple cotton dress she could move in, sturdy boots she had purchased in Las Vegas, and a wide-brimmed hat against the sun. She packed her supplies in a canvas bag and made her way to the livery stable as the town was just beginning to wake. Parker was already there, saddling a tall chestnut gelding. He looked up when she entered, taking in her preparations with an approving nod. "Good. You are prompt and dressed sensibly. This is a promising start." He gestured to a smaller paint horse in a nearby stall. "That is Daisy. She is calm and sure-footed, good for someone getting back into riding. Go ahead and make her acquaintance while I finish with Thunder here." Caroline approached the paint mare slowly, offering her hand to be sniffed. Daisy regarded her with large, gentle eyes and accepted a pat on her soft nose. Under Parker's instruction, Caroline saddled the mare, her hands remembering the motions from long ago. Parker watched without interfering, but she noticed he checked her work once she finished, making a minor adjustment to the cinch. "Good enough," he said. "Let us get supplies from the store and head out." They loaded up with additional water, hardtack, dried meat, coffee, and other trail supplies. The proprietor of the general store, a sharp-eyed man named Mr. Hendricks, seemed to approve of Parker's involvement. "If anyone can find sign of your brother, it would be Parker," he told Caroline. "Grew up out here, knows the land like he knows his own name. Tracked down 3 lost miners last winter when everyone else had given up." "Did you find them alive?" Caroline asked. 2 out of 3, Parker answered honestly. The third had fallen into a ravine and broken his neck, but his family was grateful to have him for burial at least. They got closure. It was a sobering reminder of what they might find, but Caroline appreciated his continued honesty. She was beginning to understand that Parker Mason was not a man who dealt in false comfort, and she respected that. They mounted up and rode out of Montezuma as the sun climbed higher, heading northwest toward the hills, where Thomas's claim was located. The morning air was still relatively cool, but Caroline could feel the promise of heat in the sun's rays. The landscape around them was a study in earth tones. Red rock, brown soil, sage-green scrub, all set against that impossibly blue sky. Parker set an easy pace, clearly mindful of Caroline's riding skills being rusty. As they rode, he pointed out landmarks and explained the terrain. "This country looks barren at first glance, but it is full of life if you know where to look," he said. "Jackrabbits, coyotes, rattlesnakes, even some black bear in the higher elevations, and it is full of hiding places. Ravines, caves, old mine shafts. A man could disappear into any of them." "Is that what you think happened to Thomas?" Caroline asked. "An accident of some kind?" "It is possible. Miners sometimes explore old shafts and get lost or trapped, or he could have been thrown from his horse and injured too badly to make it back. But I do not want to speculate until we have had a chance to search properly." He glanced over at her. "How are you holding up? Be honest." "I am fine," Caroline said, and it was mostly true. Her thighs were already starting to ache from the unaccustomed riding, but she was determined not to complain. How much further to his claim? Another hour, maybe a bit less. They rode in companionable silence for a while. Caroline found herself stealing glances at Parker, studying this man who had agreed to help her. His hands on the reins were capable and relaxed, and he sat his horse with the ease of someone who had spent most of his life in the saddle. There was something quietly competent about him that she found reassuring. "How long have you been in New Mexico territory?" she asked eventually. "All my life. Born here when it was still wilder than it is now, if you can believe that. My father was a Texas cowboy who came west after the war, met my mother in Santa Fe. They are both gone now, been almost 5 years. I work various ranches, do some guiding, some tracking, make enough to get by. No desire to settle in one place. Have your own ranch," Parker gave a slight smile. "Maybe someday. For now, I like the freedom of moving around. Every job is different, every day brings something new." He shifted in his saddle. "What about you? What was your life like in Boston? Quiet? Predictable?" "I worked as a seamstress, lived in the same small house for years. I suppose some people would find it dull, but it was home. And I had Thomas, at least until he decided to seek his fortune out here. You must care for him a great deal to come all this way." "He is my responsibility," Caroline said simply. "When our parents died, I promised myself I would protect him, make sure he had a chance at a good life. I may have failed at that, but I will not fail to search for him now." "You did not fail," Parker said quietly. "You raised him, gave him a foundation. What he chose to do as a man was his decision, not your failure. And coming out here to search for him, that takes more courage than most people have." His words warmed something in Caroline's chest, though she tried not to examine the feeling too closely. She had not come west seeking compliments or comfort, only answers about Thomas. They reached the claim site just before midday. It was a rough setup. A small tent that had partially collapsed, a campfire ring with cold ashes, some basic mining equipment, and a hole dug into the hillside where Thomas had been working his claim. Everything had an abandoned look, with dust covering surfaces and desert plants already beginning to reclaim the space. Parker dismounted and helped Caroline down from Daisy, his hands steadying her waist for just a moment longer than strictly necessary. She felt the warmth of his touch through her dress and stepped back quickly, flustered by her own reaction. "Let us take a look around," Parker said, seemingly unaffected. "You check the camp area, see if anything seems out of place or missing. I am going to look at the ground, see if I can pick up any tracks that might tell us which direction he went." Caroline moved through the camp slowly, examining everything with careful attention. Thomas's bedroll was still laid out in the collapsed tent, his spare clothes folded neatly in a wooden crate. His canteen hung from a rope tied between 2 juniper trees. It all looked exactly like someone had simply walked away expecting to return shortly. Meanwhile, Parker circled the area in ever-widening loops, his eyes on the ground. Caroline watched him work, impressed by his concentration and the way he seemed to read the earth like other people read books. After nearly an hour, he returned to where she waited. "There are old tracks everywhere, mostly from the Marshall search party, but I found something interesting. See that path heading up into those hills to the north?" He pointed to a barely visible trail winding between rocks. "There are tracks there that look older, could be from around the time your brother disappeared. They lead up towards some caves I know about, might be worth investigating." "Let us go then," Caroline said immediately. "We will, but not today. Those caves are several hours from here, and we would not make it back before dark. We will head back to town, get fresh supplies, and come out tomorrow morning prepared to camp overnight if necessary. I want to do this right, not rushed." Caroline wanted to argue, to insist they press on immediately, but she recognized the wisdom in his words. Rushing into unknown terrain as the day waned would be foolish, potentially dangerous. As much as it frustrated her, she nodded agreement. They rode back to Montezuma in the afternoon heat, arriving dusty and tired. Caroline's whole body ached from the riding, but she tried to hide it as they returned the horses to the livery and made their way back to the main street. "Get some rest tonight," Parker told her. "Tomorrow could be a long couple of days. I will arrange for supplies and camping gear." "I can help," Caroline protested. "I do not want to be dead weight on this journey." Parker studied her for a moment, then smiled. It was the first real smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his face, softening the hard edges and revealing the good man beneath the weathered exterior. "All right. Meet me at the general store in an hour. We will plan provisions together." That evening, Caroline discovered that planning a wilderness expedition was more complex than she had imagined. They needed not just food and water, but proper camping gear, extra rope, lanterns, matches, first aid supplies, and a dozen other items Parker rattled off with practiced ease. She contributed her own knowledge about what fabrics and materials would hold up best, which actually proved helpful. "You have a good practical mind," Parker observed as they finalized their list. "That will serve you well out here." They arranged to meet again at dawn, and Caroline returned to the boarding house for supper and what she hoped would be a decent night's sleep. But as she lay in bed that night, her mind would not quiet. Tomorrow they might find real answers about Thomas. The thought was both hopeful and terrifying. She must have eventually slept, because she woke with a start to find dawn light creeping through her window. She dressed quickly and gathered her things, meeting Parker at the livery as planned. He had already saddled both horses and loaded a pack mule with their supplies. "Ready?" he asked, and Caroline nodded. They set out into another clear morning, retracing their route to Thomas's claim and then continuing up into the hills beyond. The terrain grew steadily rougher, with rocky outcroppings and steep slopes that required careful navigation. Parker led the way with confidence, clearly familiar with this country. As they climbed higher, Caroline noticed the vegetation changing slightly. More pinyon pines appeared among the juniper and sage, and the air grew a fraction cooler. The views became spectacular, with vista after vista of rolling desert hills stretching to distant mountains. "It is beautiful," she said softly, surprising herself with the admission. "It is," Parker agreed. "Hard and dangerous, but beautiful. The first time you see this country, it seems hostile. But spend enough time out here and you start to understand it has its own kind of grace." He glanced back at her. "How are you holding up?" "Better than yesterday," Caroline admitted, "though I suspect I will be sore for a week after this." "Probably," Parker said with a hint of amusement. "But you are doing well. Better than most Eastern folk would." They reached the area where Parker had spotted the old tracks around midday. He dismounted and studied the ground carefully, then began following the faint trail up a narrow canyon. Caroline followed on foot, leading Daisy while Parker did the same with Thunder and the mule. The canyon wound between high rock walls that provided welcome shade from the midday sun. After about 30 minutes of walking, Parker stopped and pointed ahead. "There. See those dark spots in the cliff face? Those are the caves I mentioned, 3 or 4 of them interconnected. Miners sometimes use them for shelter or storage. If your brother came up this way, he might have had reason to explore them." They secured the horses and mule at the canyon entrance, where there was enough vegetation for grazing, then made their way carefully toward the caves. Parker lit a lantern as they approached the first opening, a dark mouth in the red rock about 10 feet across. "Stay close to me," he instructed. "Caves can be unstable and there might be animals sheltering in them. If I tell you to run, you run without questions. Understood, understood. They entered the cave slowly, the lantern light pushing back the darkness to reveal a chamber about 20 feet deep with several passages leading off it. The air inside was cooler and smelled of earth and stone. Caroline's heart pounded as Parker moved methodically through the space, checking each passage. In the third passage, Parker stopped suddenly. "Caroline, come here, carefully." She moved to his side and gasped. On the ground lay a leather journal, a rock hammer, and a canvas sample bag, all covered in dust but clearly recognizable. "Are those your brothers?" Parker asked quietly. "Yes," Caroline whispered, kneeling beside the items. "The journal is definitely his. I recognize it from his room." "Why would these be here?" Parker raised the lantern higher, illuminating the passage ahead. "This tunnel goes back quite a way. I am going to follow it. You wait here." "No, I am coming with you, Caroline. If Thomas is in there, I am not waiting outside, please." Parker looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but stay right behind me." They moved deeper into the passage, which narrowed and twisted as it went. Caroline's breath came quick and shallow, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and hope. The lantern light danced on the rock walls, creating weird shadows that seemed to move with lives of their own. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes, the passage opened into a larger chamber. Parker raised the lantern and they both froze. On the far side of the chamber, slumped against the rock wall, was a figure. "Thomas!" Caroline screamed, rushing forward, but Parker caught her arm. "Wait, let me check first." He approached the figure slowly, holding the lantern high. As the light fell on the man's face, Caroline saw it was indeed her brother, but he was not moving. Parker knelt beside him, pressing fingers against his neck, leaning close to feel for breath. After a moment that stretched into eternity, Parker looked back at her with an expression of wonder. "He is alive, unconscious, barely breathing, but alive." Caroline fell to her knees beside Thomas, tears streaming down her face. Her brother looked terrible, thin and pale, his clothes filthy and his lips cracked. But he was breathing, his chest rising and falling shallowly. "What happened to him?" she asked through her tears. Parker was already examining Thomas carefully, checking for injuries. "Looks like his right leg is broken badly. See how it is lying at that angle, and there is an old wound on his head, mostly healed but probably from a fall. My guess is he came into these caves exploring, maybe looking for ore veins, fell and injured himself, and could not get back out. But how has he survived for 3 weeks?" Parker pointed the lantern toward the back of the chamber, revealing a small pool of water seeping from the rock. "Underground spring. He has had water, but no food and no way to get help. He is incredibly lucky to be alive." "We have to get him out of here," Caroline said urgently. "We have to get him to a doctor." "We will, but we have to be careful. Moving him wrong could make his injuries worse. And he is weak, probably dehydrated despite the water. We need to stabilize him first, get some water and food into him if we can wake him." Over the next hour, Parker proved exactly how capable he was in a crisis. He rigged a travois from their supplies, fashioning a makeshift splint for Thomas's broken leg using rope and pieces of wood from their camp equipment. Caroline held her brother while Parker worked, talking to him softly even though he remained unconscious, telling him he was safe now, that she had found him, that everything would be all right. They managed to get some water between his lips, and after a while Thomas stirred slightly, his eyelids fluttering. His eyes opened just a crack, unfocused and confused. "Caroline," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I am here, Tommy," she said, using the childhood nickname she had not spoken in years. "I am here. We are going to get you home." His eyes closed again, but his hand squeezed hers weakly, and fresh tears spilled down Caroline's cheeks. Getting Thomas out of the cave system proved to be grueling work. Parker did most of the heavy lifting, carefully dragging the travois through the narrow passages while Caroline guided and steadied it from behind. It took them nearly 2 hours to reach the cave entrance, both of them exhausted and sweating despite the cool cave air. Once outside, they secured Thomas on the travois more thoroughly, and Parker rigged it to be pulled by thunder. The big gelding was steady and strong, perfect for the task. "It is going to be slow going back," Parker warned. "We need to keep the travois as level and steady as possible. It will be dark before we make it to town." "I do not care how long it takes," Caroline said, "as long as we get him to help." The journey back to Montezuma was indeed slow and challenging. They had to stop frequently to check on Thomas, to give him water, to make sure the travois was holding together. Night fell when they were still an hour from town, and they continued by moonlight and lantern, Parker leading Thunder with infinite patience while Caroline rode beside the travois, keeping watch over her brother. It was nearly 10 o'clock when they finally reached Montezuma, riding straight to the house of Dr. Brennan, the town's physician. The elderly doctor took one look at Thomas and immediately cleared his examining table, calling for his wife to help. "Get him inside, quickly but carefully," he instructed. "Where did you find him?" "In a cave system up in the northern hills," Parker explained as they transferred Thomas to the table. "Looks like he has been there since he disappeared. Broken leg, head injury, severe dehydration, and starvation." Dr. Brennan was already examining Thomas, his experienced hands gentle but thorough. "You two wait outside. This will take some time." Caroline started to protest, but Parker gently guided her toward the door. "Let the doctor work. We will just be in the way." They sat on the porch of the doctor's house, Caroline too anxious to do anything but stare at the door, willing it to open with good news. Parker sat beside her, his presence steady and calming. "You saved his life," Caroline said quietly. "If you had not known about those caves, had not found that trail, we never would have found him in time." "We saved his life," Parker corrected. "You came all the way out here. You did not give up when the marshal had no answers. You rode for 2 days through country you did not know." "You did that, Caroline. I just helped." She turned to look at him in the lamplight spilling from the house windows, seeing the genuine warmth in his eyes. Something shifted in her chest, a feeling that went beyond gratitude or relief. "Thank you," she said softly. "I will never be able to thank you enough." "You do not have to thank me. I am just glad we found him alive." They sat in silence after that, occasionally standing to pace, then sitting again. Caroline found herself achingly aware of Parker's presence beside her, of the quiet strength he radiated, of how safe she felt with him near. It was past midnight when Dr. Brennan finally emerged, wiping his hands on a cloth. Caroline jumped to her feet. "He is alive and stable," the doctor said immediately. "The leg break is bad, but clean. I have set it and splinted it properly. The head injury has healed on its own, though he may have some lingering issues with headaches or memory. The biggest concern is how weak he is. 3 weeks without food takes a terrible toll on the body. He will need careful nursing for the next several weeks, good nutrition, rest, and time to heal." "But he will recover?" Caroline asked, holding her breath. "With proper care, yes, I believe he will make a full recovery. He is young and was healthy before this. Those factors are in his favor." Dr. Brennan smiled tiredly. "You found him just in time. Another few days and I do not think he would have made it." Caroline felt her knees go weak with relief, and Parker's hand steadied her elbow. She looked up at him and saw her own relief mirrored in his face. "Can I see him?" she asked, briefly. He is sleeping now, but you can sit with him for a few minutes. Then you should get some rest yourself, Miss Devlin. You look exhausted." Thomas lay on a bed in the doctor's back room, cleaned up and covered with blankets, and Roman IV dripping fluids into his arm. He looked impossibly young and fragile, but his breathing was deeper and more regular than it had been in the cave. Caroline pulled a chair beside the bed and took his hand, fresh tears sliding down her face. These were tears of relief and gratitude, replacing the tears of fear she had shed for so many days. "I found you, Tommy," she whispered. "You are going to be all right." Parker waited outside, giving her privacy with her brother. When she finally emerged, he walked her back to the boarding house through the quiet streets. "Get some sleep," he said when they reached the entrance. "I will check on you and Thomas tomorrow." "You do not have to," Caroline said, though she found she very much wanted him to. "You have already done so much." "I know I do not have to. I want to." He paused, seeming to wrestle with something, then added, "This may not be the right time to say this, but I have been thinking about it all day." "You are a remarkable woman, Caroline Devlin. Brave and determined and strong. Your brother is lucky to have you." Caroline felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the warm night air. "I think he and I are both lucky you agreed to help us. Maybe we are all a bit lucky then." Parker tipped his hat to her. "Good night, Caroline. Sleep well." "Good night, Parker." She watched him walk away into the darkness, her heart full of emotions she was only beginning to recognize and understand. Then she climbed the stairs to her room and fell into bed, so exhausted she was asleep almost before her head hit the pillow. The next several weeks passed in a blur of caring for Thomas. Dr. Brennan agreed to let him be moved to the boarding house once he was strong enough, and Caroline transformed her room into a sick room, tending to her brother with devoted care. She cooked strengthening broths and gradually introduced more solid foods as he could tolerate them. She changed his bandages, helped him with personal needs, read to him, and simply sat with him during the long hours of his recovery. Thomas's memory of the accident was fragmented and confused. He remembered exploring the caves, remembered a sudden fall and terrible pain, and then only vague impressions of darkness and thirst and the slow realization that he might die alone in those caves. "I tried to call for help," he told Caroline one afternoon about a week after they found him. "But my voice was so weak, and I knew no one could hear me. I kept thinking about you, about how you would never know what happened to me. That was the worst part, Caroline. Not the pain or even the fear of dying, but thinking you would spend the rest of your life wondering." "But I found you," Caroline said, squeezing his hand. "I came looking and Parker helped me find you, and now you are going to be fine. This Parker must be some kind of man to search that hard for a stranger." "He is," Caroline agreed, feeling that warm flutter in her chest again. "He really is." Parker came by nearly every day, bringing news from town, fresh supplies, or just checking on how Thomas was healing. Caroline found herself looking forward to his visits with an anticipation that went beyond simple friendship. She noticed small things about him: the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentleness in his rough hands when he helped adjust Thomas's pillows, the way he listened when she talked about her worries or her past. One evening, about 3 weeks after they found Thomas, Parker invited Caroline to take a walk. Thomas was sleeping peacefully, and Mrs. Sullivan agreed to sit with him while Caroline took some much-needed fresh air. They walked to the edge of town where the desert opened up before them, the setting sun painting the landscape in impossible colors. Caroline breathed deeply, realizing she had barely left the boarding house in weeks. "How are you holding up?" Parker asked, his voice gentle. "I am well." "Tired, but well. Thomas is improving every day. Dr. Brennan says he can probably start putting a little weight on his leg in another week or two." That is good news. And what about after he is fully recovered? Will you go back to Boston? The question took Caroline by surprise. She had been so focused on Thomas's recovery that she had not thought much about what came next. I suppose so. That is where our life was. Was, Parker repeated softly. Past tense. Caroline looked at him, startled by his observation. What do you mean? I just noticed you said was, not is. Maybe your life is somewhere different now. Before Caroline could respond, Parker continued. I need to tell you something, and I am just going to say it plain because I am not good at fancy words. These past weeks, getting to know you, spending time with you, I've come to care for you a great deal. More than I probably should, given that you will be leaving soon. But I would regret it forever if I did not tell you how I feel. Caroline's heart began to pound. Parker. You do not have to say anything, he said quickly. I know you have a life back east, responsibilities, a home. I know I am just a cowboy who will probably never have much to offer beyond a simple life in hard country. But I wanted you to know that meeting you has changed something for me. You have changed something for me. Caroline stared at him, emotions swirling through her like a storm. She thought about Boston, about the small house and the familiar streets and the life she had always known. Then she thought about these past weeks, about the way her heart lifted every time Parker walked through the door, about the feeling of rightness she felt in his presence. You are not just anything, she said softly. You are one of the best men I have ever known. You are brave and kind and honest. You saved my brother's life and you have been a true friend to both of us. But, Parker asked, clearly hearing the hesitation in her voice. But I am afraid, Caroline admitted. Afraid of making the wrong choice, afraid of leaving behind everything I have known, afraid of these feelings that I barely understand. This is all so new, Parker. A few months ago, I was living a quiet, predictable life. Now everything has changed. Parker nodded slowly. I understand. And I do not want to pressure you or make things harder. I just wanted you to know that if you decided to stay out here, there would be someone mighty happy about it. They walked back to the boarding house in thoughtful silence. When they reached the door, Caroline turned to him. Can I ask you something? Of course. When you look at your future, what do you see? Parker considered the question seriously. I see a small ranch, nothing fancy but enough land to run some cattle and horses, a house that is solid and comfortable. Maybe a family someday if I am lucky enough. Hard work but honest work, building something that lasts. What about you? What did you see for your future before all this happened? I saw myself growing old in Boston, probably alone, supporting myself with my sewing. Thomas would visit sometimes, maybe with a wife and children eventually. It was not an unhappy vision, just a quiet one. And now I do not know what I see, Caroline said honestly, but I think maybe the quiet life I imagined is not what I want anymore. I just need time to figure out what I do want. Take all the time you need, Parker said gently. I will be here. Over the next month, Caroline found herself thinking constantly about Parker's words and her own conflicting feelings. Thomas continued to improve steadily, progressing from bed rest to hobbling around on crutches. As he healed physically, he also seemed to undergo a transformation of spirit. The experience of nearly dying in those caves had changed him, made him more thoughtful and less reckless. I think I am done with mining, he told Caroline one afternoon in early November. I spent 3 weeks in the dark thinking I was going to die, and all I could think about was what a fool I had been to chase silver instead of building something real. If I get out of this, I told myself, I am going to do something different with my life. What would you do instead? Caroline asked. I have been talking to Parker about ranching. He knows a lot about it and I think I could learn. It is honest work and there is a future in it. Maybe I could help him start that ranch he talks about sometimes." Thomas paused, then gave her a knowing look. "He talks about you too, you know, about how remarkable you are, how strong." Caroline felt herself blushing. "Thomas, I am not blind, Caroline. I see how you light up when he comes by, how you two talk for hours. And I see how he looks at you like you are the answer to a question he has been asking his whole life." Thomas reached for her hand. "You raised me, sacrificed for me, put your own life on hold to make sure I had a chance. Do not put your life on hold anymore. If Parker makes you happy, if staying out here is what you want, then do it. You have earned the right to choose your own happiness." "It is not that simple," Caroline protested, but her words lacked conviction. "Why is it not? Because you are afraid. Because it is different from what you planned. Caroline, life changes. We do not always get to choose how or when, but we do get to choose what we do about it. I almost died in those caves, and what I learned is that the only thing that really matters is the people we love and the life we build with them." His words stayed with Caroline as autumn deepened, and the air grew crisp and cool. The landscape around Montezuma transformed with the season, the cottonwoods along the creek turning brilliant gold, the light taking on a slanted quality that made everything seem magical. Parker took her riding one afternoon when Thomas was well enough to be left alone for a few hours. They rode up into the hills, higher than they had gone before, to a spot where they could see for miles in every direction. The view was breathtaking. Mountains in the distance still capped with snow, valleys rolling away in shades of rust and gold, the sky so vast and blue it made Caroline's heart ache. "This is what I love about this country," Parker said quietly as they sat on a flat rock overlooking the vista. "It is so big, so wild, it makes you realize how small you are and how big the world is, makes you understand that anything is possible." "It is beautiful," Caroline agreed. "I never imagined anything like this existed. In Boston, everything was so confined, so orderly. This feels like freedom." "It is freedom in a way. Freedom to build the life you want, to be who you want to be. Out here, your past does not matter as much as what you make of your future." He turned to look at her. "Caroline, I know I told you I would give you time, and I meant it, but I need to tell you something else." "What is it?" "I love you. I have loved you since that night you walked into the Silver Spur and demanded my help with such fierce determination. I loved you when we were searching for Thomas, loved you when I saw how tenderly you cared for him, loved you more with every conversation we have had. And I will go on loving you whether you stay or go, but I had to tell you." Caroline felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not tears of confusion or fear. They were tears of recognition, of finally understanding what her heart had been trying to tell her for weeks. "I love you too," she said, the words feeling both terrifying and absolutely right. "I think I have been afraid to admit it because it means choosing a completely different life than I had planned. But Thomas is right. The life I had planned was safe and predictable, but it was not really living. Being here with you, that is living." Parker took her hands in his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Are you sure? Because once you say yes to this, to us, I am never letting you go. I will build you that ranch I talked about, give you the best life I can, and love you every single day." "I am sure," Caroline said, and she was. "I want to stay here. I want to build a life with you. It terrifies me and thrills me in equal measure, but I know it is right." Parker pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and Caroline felt something inside her finally settle into place. This was where she belonged, here in this wild, beautiful country, with this good, strong man who had found her brother and her heart. They were married in December of 1882, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Montezuma. Thomas stood as Parker's best man, still using a cane but healing well. Mrs. Sullivan and several other townspeople who had come to know Caroline during her stay attended, and Dr. Brennan gave her away, having become something of a father figure during Thomas's recovery. Caroline wore a dress she made herself from fabric purchased at the general store, simple but elegant, and she carried wildflowers that Parker had ridden into the hills to gather that morning. As she stood beside him and spoke her vows, promising to love and honor him for the rest of her days, she felt a joy so profound it almost frightened her. Parker's voice was steady as he made his own vows, his eyes never leaving hers. "I promise to provide for you, protect you, and cherish you for as long as I live. I promise to build us a home and a life worth living. And I promise to never take for granted the gift of your love." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Parker kissed her with such tenderness that Caroline felt tears slide down her cheeks. They were tears of pure happiness, of gratitude for the strange and winding path that had brought her to this moment. The reception was held at the Silver Spur, which had been cleaned and decorated for the occasion. The same saloon where Caroline had first sought Parker's help now hosted their wedding celebration, and she appreciated the symmetry of it. They danced to music from a fiddle player, ate cake that Mrs. Sullivan had baked, and received congratulations from people who had been strangers just months ago, but now felt like friends. Thomas pulled Caroline aside at one point in the evening, hugging her tightly. "I am so happy for you," he said. "And I am sorry my disappearance brought you out here under such terrible circumstances, but I am grateful for how things turned out." "I am grateful too," Caroline said, "for all of it, even the hard parts. They led us here." Parker had used his savings to put a down payment on a small piece of land about 10 miles from Montezuma, near a reliable water source and with good grazing. He had already started building a house with Thomas's help, working on it during the months of Thomas's recovery. It was simple but solid, with 2 bedrooms, a main room and a kitchen, built of adobe and timber. They moved into the house the week after the wedding, and Caroline spent her first days as a married woman making the house a home. She sewed curtains for the windows, arranged their simple furniture, and set up a small vegetable garden near the house. Parker and Thomas worked on building a barn and corrals, purchasing a small herd of cattle and horses to start their ranching operation. The work was hard, much harder than anything Caroline had done in Boston, but she found satisfaction in it. She learned to cook over a wood stove, to preserve food for winter, to help with ranch work when extra hands were needed. Her hands, once soft from sewing, became rough and calloused. Her skin tanned from the sun, and her body grew stronger from the physical labor. But more than the physical changes, Caroline felt something else transforming inside her. She felt alive in a way she never had before, connected to the land and the seasons and the rhythm of ranch life. She felt purposeful, needed, part of something larger than herself, and she felt loved. Parker showed his love in 100 small ways every day. A gentle touch as he passed her in the house, wildflowers left on the kitchen table, the way he listened to her thoughts and valued her opinions, the tender passion they shared in the privacy of their bedroom. He made her feel cherished and respected in equal measure. Thomas proved to be a natural with horses and took charge of that part of the ranch operation. His leg healed completely over the winter, leaving only a slight limp when he was tired. He built himself a small cabin on the property and became a true partner in the ranching venture, working alongside Parker with dedication and growing skill. The first winter was challenging, with bitter cold and snow that Caroline had not expected in New Mexico territory. But the house stayed warm, they had enough provisions, and the 3 of them worked together to care for the livestock and maintain the property. On long winter evenings, They sat by the fire, Caroline sewing or reading while Parker carved and Thomas played a harmonica he had purchased in town. It was simple, but it was good. Spring came with a rush of green and wildflowers, and with it came news that made Caroline's heart soar. She was pregnant. Parker was overjoyed, immediately becoming protective and attentive, trying to take over all of Caroline's chores until she laughingly told him she was pregnant, not fragile. "I just want to take care of you," he said, pulling her into his arms. "You and this baby are my whole world." "I know," Caroline said, resting her head against his chest. "And I love you for it. But I am strong, Parker. I can keep working and helping. This is my ranch too, remember?" Their son was born in October of 1883, delivered by Dr. Brennan, who made the journey out from Montezuma despite his advancing age. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Caroline was certain she could not continue. But Parker stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and offering encouragement. When the baby finally arrived, healthy and squalling with indignation, Caroline wept with relief and joy. Parker held their son with such wonder and tenderness that she fell in love with him all over again. They named him James Parker Mason, James after Parker's father and Parker as a middle name to carry on the tradition. He was a healthy, hungry baby with Parker's hazel eyes and Caroline's dark hair, and he quickly became the center of their universe. Thomas proved to be a devoted uncle, often taking James for walks around the property or sitting with him while Caroline caught up on chores. Watching her brother with her son, seeing the gentle patience he showed, Caroline marveled at the man he had become. The reckless boy who had chased silver and nearly died in a cave had transformed into a responsible, caring man who was building a good life. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily over the next few years. They gradually increased their herd, improved their facilities, and built a reputation for quality livestock. Parker's knowledge and hard work, combined with Thomas's skill with horses and Caroline's careful management of finances and supplies, made them a formidable team. Caroline gave birth to 2 more children over the years, a daughter named Margaret in 1885, and another son, Robert, in 1887. The house that had seemed so spacious when they built it grew crowded with children and life, and Parker added 2 more rooms and a larger kitchen. On a warm evening in June of 1890, Caroline stood on the porch of their home watching the sun set over the hills. Parker came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Penny for your thoughts," he said. "I was thinking about how much has changed since I came to Montezuma 8 years ago. I was so frightened then, so uncertain about everything, and now look at all this." She gestured at the ranch, at their children playing in the yard, at Thomas riding in from checking the north pasture. "We built something real here, Parker, something lasting." "We did," Parker agreed. "And it all started because you were brave enough to get on a train and come looking for your brother. If you had not done that, if I had not agreed to help you, none of this would exist. Do you ever regret it?" Caroline asked. Taking on an Eastern lady who knew nothing about ranch life, Parker turned her in his arms to face him, his expression serious. "Not for one single moment. Marrying you was the best decision I ever made. Every good thing in my life came from that choice." Caroline reached up to cup his face, feeling the familiar roughness of his beard under her palm. "I love you, more than I could ever put into words. I love you too. Always have, always will." They stood there together as the sky blazed orange and pink and gold, as their children's laughter echoed across the ranch, as the evening breeze carried the scent of sage and promise. Caroline thought about the girl she had been when she arrived in New Mexico territory, so determined and so afraid. She thought about the moment she had walked into the Silver Spur and demanded Parker's help, not knowing she was demanding so much more than assistance finding her brother. She had come west looking for Thomas and found a whole new life instead. She had found purpose and strength, community and home. But most of all, she had found Parker, and in finding him, she had found the deepest, truest part of herself. The years continued to roll by with their mixture of joy and challenge. James grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved reading and helping his father with the ranch accounts. Margaret proved to be adventurous and spirited, riding horses almost before she could walk properly, and showing Thomas's natural affinity for the animals. Robert was gentle and artistic, spending hours drawing the landscape and the animals around him. Thomas eventually married a widow named Sarah, who owned a small homestead nearby. She had a young daughter from her first marriage, and Thomas proved to be a loving stepfather. They built a house on their portion of the land, and the ranch continued to expand as a true family operation. Caroline's skills as a seamstress never went away, and she supplemented their ranch income by taking in sewing work from families in Montezuma and the surrounding area. She became known for her fine work and fair prices, and teaching Margaret to sew became a treasured time of connection between mother and daughter. Life was not without its difficulties. They faced harsh winters, drought years, illness, and the inevitable setbacks that came with ranching. But they faced everything together, as a family, and their bond only grew stronger through the challenges. On their 10th wedding anniversary in December of 1892, Parker surprised Caroline by taking her back to Montezuma for a night away from the children, who were left in Thomas and Sarah's capable care. They stayed at the boarding house, in the same room Caroline had occupied when she first arrived, and ate dinner at a restaurant that had opened since those early days. As they walked through the town after dinner, Caroline noticed how much had changed and how much had stayed the same. The marshal's office was still there, though Marshal Webb had retired and moved back east. The Silver Spur still stood, though under new management. The general store had expanded and several new businesses had opened. "You remember the first night we met?" Parker asked as they stood outside the Silver Spur. "How could I forget? I was so desperate and frightened, trying to act brave. You looked at me like I was crazy for wanting to search for Thomas myself." "I thought you were crazy," Parker admitted with a grin, "and incredibly brave. I could not figure out if you were foolish or fearless, so I decided to find out." He pulled her closer. "Best decision I ever made." "You have said that before," Caroline teased, "because it is true. I will keep saying it for the rest of my life." Parker grew serious. "Thank you, Caroline, for loving me, for building this life with me, for giving me a family and a home, for everything." "Thank you for finding my brother," Caroline said softly, "and for finding my heart." They kissed under the stars in the same town where their journey had begun, and Caroline felt the same flutter in her chest she had felt that first night. Some things, she reflected, never changed. The essential truth of their love remained constant, even as everything else evolved around them. The turn of the century found them well established and prosperous by frontier standards. Their ranch had grown to several hundred acres with a healthy herd of cattle and a reputation for quality horses that Thomas had built through years of patient work. Their children were growing into capable young adults, each with their own dreams and paths. James announced his intention to study law, wanting to help bring justice and order to the growing territory. They saved and scraped to send him to school in Santa Fe, proud beyond measure of his ambition and intelligence. Margaret showed no interest in leaving the ranch, declaring her intention to stay and eventually take over the horse operation from Thomas. Her skill with difficult horses had become legendary in the area, and she was already training animals for ranchers from across the territory. Robert's artistic talent had developed remarkably, and a visiting art dealer who saw his work encouraged him to pursue formal training. It was decided he would go to Denver to study, expanding his skills while staying relatively close to home. Caroline and Parker watched their children grow and pursue their dreams with mixed emotions. Pride in their accomplishments mixed with sadness at seeing them leave, but also satisfaction in knowing they had raised children who were brave enough to reach for what they wanted. "We did good," Parker said one evening as they sat on their porch, watching another spectacular sunset. "We did," Caroline agreed. "They are good people, Parker, strong and kind and determined. They will do good things in this world." "They learned from the best," Parker said, squeezing her hand. "From a mother who crossed half a continent to save her brother, who built a ranch from nothing, who loved them with everything she had." The years had added gray to Parker's hair and lines around his eyes, but to Caroline, he was still the same man who had agreed to help her all those years ago. Still strong, still honest, still the best man she had ever known. And when he looked at her, his eyes still held the same love and wonder they had held on their wedding day. Thomas and Sarah's daughter grew up and married a rancher from Texas, moving away but visiting regularly. Thomas and Sarah themselves settled into comfortable middle age, still working the ranch alongside Parker and Caroline, but also taking time to enjoy life. One evening in the spring of 1902, the whole family gathered for dinner at the main house. James was home from Santa Fe on break, Margaret and Robert were both present, and Thomas and Sarah joined them with their younger children. The house rang with conversation and laughter, with the sounds of family. After dinner, Parker stood and raised his glass. "I want to make a toast," he said. 20 years ago, a brave woman came to Montezuma looking for her missing brother. I helped her search, and we found him alive against all odds. But we found so much more than that. We found love, family, purpose. We built this ranch together, raised beautiful children, created a legacy." He turned to Caroline. "Everything good in my life started the day you walked into that saloon and demanded my help. Here is to you, Caroline Mason, the love of my life and the strongest woman I know." To Caroline, everyone echoed, raising their glasses. Caroline felt tears on her cheeks as she looked around the table at these people she loved, this family they had built together. She thought about the frightened girl who had stepped off the train in Las Vegas all those years ago, desperate and alone. She thought about Parker finding Thomas in those caves, about their slow-growing love, about every moment that had led them to this one. "I have a toast, too," she said, standing. "To Parker, who saved my brother and captured my heart. To Thomas, whose disappearance brought me to this beautiful territory. To all of you, my family, my home, my heart. I came west looking for one thing and found everything I never knew I needed. I am the luckiest woman alive." As the evening wound down and the family gradually departed, Caroline and Parker found themselves alone on the porch once more, their favorite spot for watching the stars come out. "You ever think about going back east?" Parker asked. "Visiting Boston, seeing how things have changed?" Caroline considered the question. "Sometimes I think about it just to see, but Boston is not home anymore. This is home. This land, this ranch, our children, this is where I belong." "I am glad," Parker said simply, "because I cannot imagine life without you." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the stars bloom across the vast New Mexico sky. The land stretched away from them in all directions, wild and beautiful and theirs. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called and another answered. The wind rustled through the cottonwoods by the creek, playing an eternal song. Caroline thought about all the paths her life could have taken. She could have stayed in Boston, could have hired someone else to search for Thomas, could have made 100 different choices that would have led to a completely different life. But she had chosen to be brave, to step into the unknown, to trust a stranger with her brother's life and, eventually, with her heart. "No regrets?" Parker asked softly, as if reading her thoughts. "Not a single one," Caroline answered, and it was the truest thing she had ever said. The years that followed brought their own changes and challenges. James completed his law studies and opened a practice in Santa Fe, eventually becoming a respected voice in the territorial government. He married a schoolteacher named Elizabeth and gave Caroline and Parker their first grandchildren, twin girls named Sarah and Emma. Margaret married a rancher from Colorado and moved to his property, but she and her husband visited regularly and maintained close ties. Her skill with horses only grew with time, and she eventually began breeding and training championship stock that won awards across the Western Territories. Robert's artistic career flourished beyond anyone's expectations. After his studies in Denver, his paintings of New Mexico landscapes gained recognition, and he began receiving commissions from wealthy collectors back east. He never forgot his roots, though, and returned home often, always bringing new sketches and stories. Thomas passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1910, at the age of 51. His death hit Caroline and Parker hard, but they took comfort in knowing he had lived a full, happy life after his near-death experience in those caves so many years ago. At his funeral, Caroline spoke about how his disappearance had brought her west, how his survival had been a miracle, and how grateful she was for every year they had together after that. "He got his second chance at life," she said, "and he made the most of it. He was a good man, a good brother, and I will miss him every day." Parker held her close as they buried Thomas on a hill overlooking the ranch, a spot with a view of the mountains he had loved. It seemed fitting that he would rest in the land that had almost claimed him, but had instead given him new life. The years moved on, as they always do. Parker's health began to decline in his 60s, his joints stiffening from years of hard work, his strength gradually waning. But his spirit remained strong, and his love for Caroline never faltered. Even on days when his body betrayed him, when he could no longer work the ranch as he once had, he found joy in sitting with Caroline on their porch, watching their grandchildren play, and remembering all they had built together. In the summer of 1918, as the world was engulfed in a terrible war and the Spanish flu began its deadly sweep across the globe, Parker fell ill. He fought the sickness for 2 weeks, and Caroline never left his side. She bathed his fevered brow, held his hand, and whispered stories of their life together into his ear. On an August morning, with Caroline holding his hand and all their children gathered around his bed, Parker opened his eyes one last time and smiled at her. "I told you once that marrying you was the best decision I ever made," he said, his voice weak but clear. "I was right. Every day with you was a gift, Caroline. I love you. I will always love you." "I love you too," Caroline said through her tears. "Wait for me, Parker. I will find you again, just like I found you the first time." He squeezed her hand one last time, smiled that gentle smile she loved so much, and closed his eyes. He was gone before the sun had climbed above the horizon. Caroline was 70 years old when she buried her husband on the same hill where they had buried Thomas, with a view of the mountains and the land they had built together. She stood at his grave with her children around her, and felt the same strange mixture of grief and gratitude she had felt at Thomas's funeral. She had been blessed, she knew. Not everyone found a love like theirs, a partnership that lasted through decades and challenges and change. Not everyone got to build a life as full and rich as the one they had created together. And while the grief of losing him was almost unbearable, she would not trade away a single day of their life together to avoid this pain. Caroline lived another 15 years after Parker's death, remaining on the ranch with Margaret and her family, who had returned to help run the property. She spent her days gardening, sewing, and spoiling her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She told them stories of the old days, of coming west to find her brother, of the cowboy who had helped her and stolen her heart. Was Grandpa Parker really that wonderful? Her great-granddaughter Alice asked one afternoon as they sat on the porch together. He was, Caroline said with a smile. He was honest and brave and kind. He worked hard, he loved deeply, and he built something lasting. But more than any of that, he made me feel like I could be whoever I wanted to be. He saw my strength when I did not see it myself, and he loved me for exactly who I was. That is the greatest gift anyone can give another person. On a cool October evening in 1933, Caroline passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 85. She was buried between Parker and Thomas on the hill, the three of them together overlooking the ranch that had been built on love and hope and determination. At her funeral, James spoke about his mother's courage, Margaret about her strength, and Robert about her creativity and vision. But they all agreed on one thing. Their mother had lived fully, loved deeply, and left a legacy that would continue through generations. The ranch continued to prosper under Margaret's management and eventually passed to her children. The Mason name became synonymous with quality horses and cattle throughout New Mexico and beyond. And every generation that lived on that land heard the story of how it all began, of Caroline coming west to find her brother and finding her heart instead. Years turned to decades and decades to a century, but the story endured. It became family legend, told and retold, embellished and preserved. And at the heart of it was always the same truth, that love could bloom in the most unlikely places, that courage could change destinies, and that sometimes the journey we think we are taking leads us somewhere far better than we ever imagined. The old ranch house still stands today, preserved by the descendants of Caroline and Parker Mason. Visitors can walk through the rooms where they lived and loved, can stand on the porch where they watched countless sunsets, can climb the hill where they rest together overlooking the land they built with their own hands. And if you stand very still on that hill at sunset, when the light turns the landscape gold and the breeze carries the scent of sage, you can almost feel them there still. The brave woman from Boston who traveled west to find her missing brother, and the kind cowboy who helped her search. Together they built a life, a family, and a love story that transcended time itself, proving that the greatest adventures often begin when we step into the unknown with hope in our hearts and courage in our souls.